Welcome, everyone. For those that are just joining us, we're going to get started in just a minute, still letting people in from the waiting room. But thank you for joining us this evening. Alrighty. Looks like it is 6 o'clock, so maybe we'll go ahead and get started. I will keep admitting people as they arrive. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Sally Maxwell, and I am the education specialist with Audubon Southwest. And I'm really excited to welcome tonight our speaker, Dara Saville. So Dara is an herbalist, a geographer, a writer, a mother, and a native plant advocate. And she is also the founder of Albuquerque Herbalism, which is a bioregional herbal studies program based out of Albuquerque. And she's also the executive director of the Yerba Mansa Project, which is a nonprofit organization focused on native medicinal plant restoration, education, and community outreach. And her new book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, A Guide to Plants and Living Landscapes of the American Southwest, was just published earlier this year by UNM Press. And I'm sure Dara will talk more about it this evening, but it is now available for purchase online through the UNM Press website, and I'm sure through other sites as well. I just want to do a little bit of Zoom etiquette basics. Everyone will notice that you have arrived muted and you will be unable to mute at this point. When we get to the end of the talk tonight and there's time for questions and answers, I will allow people to unmute, but we'll mostly be using the chat box. So you'll be able to see the chat at the bottom of your screen. And if you want to turn the captions on or off, there is a little button that says live transcript, and you can change that feature there. So with that, I will pass it over to Dara. I'm going to stop sharing so you're able to share and go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sally, for that nice introduction. And thanks so much to the Audubon Society for hosting this event and giving us free, inspiring entertainment for this whole series of events that they're hosting. And I'm really pleased to be here with everyone tonight. So thank you for sharing your evening with me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. There's always, there's always just so much to talk about and never seems like enough time. But I do really welcome questions and hope that you'll have questions. It's more fun if we can have a little bit of discussion, especially at the end. So feel free to put questions in the chat and I'll be happy to address them. As Sally said, my name is Dara Saville, and I just love plants, and I'm really happy that other people like to talk about plants. So I selected a topic tonight that I thought might be of interest to you all, which is native edible and medicinal shrubs for wildlife and people. I'm a plant person. I don't really know a whole lot about birds, so I won't be able to answer questions that pertain to specific bird species, liking specific plant species, but I did choose a selection of edible and medicinal plants, shrubs in this case, which are known to host a large number of bird species and other wildlife species, including mammals and insects and so on. So these are sort of a collection of plants that I think are really excellent for sustaining wildlife, and sustaining us. So let's take a little exploration into some of these plants, which I picked. Most of them are in the materia medica of my book, as Sally mentioned. I just published a book called The Ecology of Herbal Medicine. And if you want to learn more about these plants, you'll be able to look at these up in the materia medica. All right, let's see. Oh, wait, we got something on the screen here.
Yeah, Dara, I'm just realizing that it looks like someone's able to annotate. So if you want to just real quick go to your share screen settings, and you can hit disable annotation if you go to the very top. Sorry about that.
That's all right. My screen share settings. I don't see that. Oh, I see. Got it. All right, let us proceed then. So I came here tonight to talk with you all about native edible and medicinal shrubs. And one of the things I've noticed in my years of teaching about native plants is that people are really into trees because they make nice shade that everyone loves, or people are really into small flowering plants because they're really beautiful and make gorgeous flowers, and people like to plant them in their gardens. And shrubs get kind of left out of the conversation a lot of times, and I feel like they're really underappreciated. And I really love shrubs, and so I thought this would be a great opportunity to pass on some shrub love to everyone. And so why am I so into shrubs, and why did I want to spend the evening with you all talking about them? Well, there's a lot of reasons. You know, firstly, I hope you can see from this picture that they're really beautiful. They're a hugely important part of our landscapes. They come in all different forms and shapes and sizes and colors. Many of them are aromatic, and so they're really beautiful and pleasing on a sensory level. And so people can really enjoy their company and their presence in wild and cultivated landscapes alike. Also, shrubs are really useful plants. They provide, as I mentioned in my introduction, a lot of really important habitat features. They sustain wildlife by providing cover and nesting sites and wild food sources for animals. They're also really useful to us as well. They provide food and medicine and landscape beautification, whether it's in wild locations or in our cultivated, urbanized world. So they're very useful plants. They're also very connective. They help us to connect with place. Native plants in general, and shrubs being so important in wild landscapes, help us to connect with where we live. The more we can learn about plants and our native shrubs and other native species, the more we connect with where we are, and we appreciate the beauty and complexity and the uniqueness of the place that we live. And I live here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the center of New Mexico, and I feel like I live in the crossroads of the world. I think it's one of the most beautiful places to be a plant person. And all of these plants that I'm talking about tonight and so many more have really helped me to make that connection with my place, and to help myself to become invested and in love with where I live. And so for me, plants are the conduit. For you, it might be birds and wildlife, but these things are all interconnected. We can't have any one of these components without the other, because everything sustains this network of life that we're a part of. And native shrubs also, I particularly love them because they're very resilient. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about what's going to happen in the future. What about climate change? We are living in the Southwest, which is already hot and dry. And it's expected to get hotter and drier. And there's a lot of talk about how we can prepare for that. How can we make our environment more resilient? How can we make ourselves more resilient in this changing world? And shrubs play a key part in that. And, many of the shrubs that we're going to talk about tonight, in fact, I'd say all of them, are very resilient characters. They have a variety of adaptations and techniques for surviving in this environment, and those adaptations are going to help them to be resilient into the future as we see more challenging environmental conditions. These are some of the plants who I feel are going to have good odds of hanging on in new conditions. And so these are plants that I like working with as an herbalist and wild food forager, because I feel that they do have this resiliency to move forward with us into the future, and have fewer vulnerabilities than many other of our native species here. So whenever I'm talking about wild foods and wild medicines, I really like to focus on these species which are really abundant, really resilient, because we want to be respectful if we ever are doing any wild harvesting. So we want to make sure we're talking about plants that want to have that kind of interaction with us, because they can sustain that kind of relationship into the future. So that's a little bit about why I picked shrubs as a topic for tonight. And so let's just dive right into talking about some of them. The first one I have picked out is the wild rose. Rosa woodsii is our most common species in our area, but there are many wild rose species that we could be talking about that you could plant in your gardens or your landscapes, or if any of you are have jobs where you might be designing communal urban landscapes, or doing wildland restoration for that matter. So wild rose is just one of the best plants out there for sustaining the health of people and wildlife. Many animals browse the leaves during the growing season, and then the hips, which are the fruits that appear after the flowers, also sustain wildlife into the cooler season of the year when there's less available for wildlife to eat. And so let's talk a little bit about why this is just such a valuable plant. So first of all, roses are one of those plants that draw people into connection very easily, because most people know roses. They're very comfortable with roses. It's something they can recognize, even the wild varieties. Roses have such a long-standing and global relationship with humans and human culture. Roses have been cultivated around the world for centuries, and many cultures around the world have embraced roses into the heart of their culture, and their stories about themselves and their stories about religion. Roses have featured prominently in the visual arts, the literary arts, in almost all of the major religions of the world. Roses have been a center part of human history and culture for so long. We almost might not be able to tell our own story without including roses. And so there's already this innate connection. It's almost like dandelions. It's something that everyone's like, oh, I know roses. I'm comfortable with that. So it's a great segue into plant connectivity for anyone who isn't already open to that. So roses as a wild edible, the hips are the best part for eating, honestly. They are extremely nutritious. They have a wide array of vitamins and minerals, including protein. They're very high in vitamin C. I think approximately 3 rose hips gives you more vitamin C than an orange. So they're really nutritious, and they're also full of antioxidants, which are known to create beneficial health cascades in many ways. And we're still learning a lot about the power of antioxidants, but rose hips are very high in that as well. So you can gather these late in the season, usually after a first frost is when that's recommended. You can make tea out of them. You can also grind them into powder and use them as a food supplement for nutritional purposes. And it's important to remember, if you are picking these, whether it's in your yard or anywhere else, that these are really important for wildlife, and we don't want to be greedy. You know, we can always go to the herb store or the grocery store, but animals can't do that. So whenever we're picking, we want to be really mindful of what role are we playing in this ecosystem, whether it's a wild location or an urban location. Animals depend on these plants and them, you know, what they're offering. So we always want to keep that in mind, the honorable harvest, respectful harvest. And so that's a little bit about roses as food, but roses are also a very important herbal medicine. They, you can collect the unopened blossoms, the buds, freshly opened flowers, and the rose hips are also medicinal. And there's tons of ethnobotanical documentation about this around the world. And also lots and lots of scientific research have been done on roses as food and medicine because of their popularity. And so, and their widespread distribution around the world. So as a medicine, roses are commonly prepared as teas, tinctures, elixirs. There's like the longest list of herbal preparations that I've ever seen for any plant is associated with roses, because they're delicious, they're beautiful. There's so many artful ways to prepare it. People have been infusing them into wine and mixing them into honey and drinking them as teas, and so on and so on. And if I use the word tincture and anyone's not familiar with that, a tincture is a common herbal preparation in which herb material is extracted into a combination of alcohol and water, because many medicinal constituents extract into water and many others extract into alcohol. So it's a great way to extract both of those kinds of components into one convenient herbal remedy. So that's what a tincture is basically. Roses are commonly used in the digestive system, especially when there's a lot of extra wetness. Roses are cooling and drying, so they help when there is a hot inflammation and a lot of excess moisture in the system. So in the digestive system, a classic example of that would be having a case of diarrhea. If your small intestine's not wringing out that water and reallocating it to the body, roses can help to rebalance those tissues, to reabsorb the water properly, thereby relieving you of that unpleasant symptom. And roses also have anti-inflammatory properties, and so they're really excellent for people who have chronic conditions as well. Roses are also used very commonly in the respiratory system, especially when there's a very wet type of cough. It can help to dry that up a little bit. So a wet respiratory condition would be benefited by roses. Roses also have a long history of being used in skin and hair products, especially for oily skin, again, because of that cooling, drying property. And there's so many more things we could say about roses. It's a very widely used herbal medicine and has many, many body benefits. And so we don't have time to go into all of the details. I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of an introduction. I have a few other plants I want to show you, so I'm going to move right along. But if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Here's mesquite. So we're moving into a different kind of wild habitat type, but mesquite is another plant that could be considered for urban planting projects, whether those are public projects or on your own private land. Mesquite hosts a large number of bird species, and we have a number of different species, again, that we might have here in the Southwest. The lower plant is what we commonly have here in New Mexico. The top picture up here is the velvet mesquite, which is a little bit less common in my immediate area, but also common in the Southwest. So depending on the species, these may be more shrubby, or they could be more like small trees. So again, there's a number of species that we could be talking about. Mesquite is really interesting in its relationship with wild animals and with humans. That has helped mesquite's population range and density to ebb and flow over thousands of years. If you can take your imagination back to the Pleistocene times when we had megafauna roaming across the deserts of the Southwest, the landscape was really different back then. Of course, not quite the same desert that we know today, but back during that time, it is theorized that the megafauna actually helped to spread mesquite through the landscape, increasing its range and density because animals were eating these nutritious pods. The seeds are highly nutritive, and so they were essentially eating them and pooping them out into a pile of fertilizer and helping this plant to spread around. And then humans came onto the scene and started settling in the Southwest region. And there's not a lot of trees to burn for fuel in this environment. So as the climate changed and people began settling in this area, we had people who were collecting this for firewood and also for food and medicine. And as I mentioned, the bean pods are very nutrient dense. They have a lot of nutritive oils. They're high in protein, and they were possibly the most important wild food source for people living in the Southwest when we were living off the land. And so during that time, mesquite's population became smaller and less dense because of this relationship with humans. And then, of course, in more recent, more modern times, we have the introduction of grazing, of livestock in our arid grasslands. And that, again, kind of takes us back to what happened with the megafauna. Cattle also like to eat these bean pods and can help it to proliferate in the landscape. So it's had this interesting relationship with the rest of the land elements, which has helped it to ebb and flow across the land over thousands of years. And mesquite, as I mentioned, is a really important wild food. It's incredibly delicious if you've ever eaten it. It's really one of my favorite wild foods. I've written about it on my blog at albuquerqueherbalism.com. There's tons of free stuff to read on there if you'd like to check it out. This is also in my book, and so you can read a lot more about it in there. But mesquite is a delicious food that you can make into a powder. This is difficult to prepare at home if you don't have a hammer mill, and who really does. These are very difficult to grind up. And so it might be easier just to buy mesquite flour. But any recipe where flour is called for, is you could substitute a portion of that with mesquite flour. Which will add wild nutrients and extra protein into your baked goods. I usually recommend sticking to about 20 to 25% mesquite flour, and then the remaining 75%, whatever type of flours you might normally use in your cooking and baking. It has a really strong, delicious flavor. So using any more percentage than that will really overpower the other flavors in your food. And also too much mesquite can bring on a little bit of gas and bloating for some people. So keeping it to a smaller percentage is recommended, but I love it. I use it in quiche crusts and cookies, and we've made so much banana bread during this last year. We put mesquite flour in that, to make it a little bit less guilty and a little more nutritive. I put it in pancakes and, just about any kind of recipe flour, I like to add some mesquite to that. So it's delicious and nutritious. And then also mesquite is a medicine as well. The leaves in particular are harvested for that purpose. It's a really good antimicrobial. So, and it's also astringent, meaning that it's kind of similar to what we said with roses, where it can help the body to reabsorb fluids and regulate the flow of fluids in the body tissues. So those two qualities, being antimicrobial and having that astringent aspect, make mesquite a really excellent herbal treatment for wound care. So for preventing infections and wounds, or treating infected wounds, or helping to stop bleeding wounds, mesquite is really excellent for that. And then of course, for the treatment of infectious diseases, mesquite can also be used internally for that purpose as well. So just checking in here on the chat, mesquite for Santa Fe. I'm not sure on how many frost tolerant days is the limit for mesquite. Might be on the edge of its range there, but if it's planted in a microclimate that gets a lot of southern exposure in the winter time, where it can stay warm during the coldest part of the year, that would give it its best odds. So I would give it a hot south facing exposure with a nice gravel mulch, something like that, to keep it as warm as possible during the winter would be my advice on that. And then mesquite, yes, is a legume. It's part of the Fabaceae family. And then, yes, you can use it to make flour. And then Lynn asks about where to buy it. There are several local sources in the Southwest for purchasing that. And I can't remember the company names off the top of my head, Lynn, but if you wanted to email me after this presentation, I'd be happy to provide those company names that I've used, which are local to the Southwest. So we could follow up with that afterwards. So I'm going to move right along here to the next plant, which is red root, or Ceanothus. And again, we have several species we could be talking about. This is another beautiful shrub, which hosts a lot of wildlife, providing cover and forage for lots of birds and other animals as well, and also a really good medicine for people. This is a root medicine, so that's the part that is harvested and used in herbal preparations. I've mostly prepared this as a tincture, and I find this to be really invaluable for things like swollen tonsils, swollen lymph nodes, and other swollen glands in the body. This is a very unique medicine in that it has this attribute of being able to tonify the blood. And that word tonify just means to strengthen. And it does that by helping to unstack blood cells. So infectious diseases or chronic inflammatory conditions can sometimes cause like sticky blood cells. And when blood cells kind of stack on each other, that's a problem for efficient blood flow. The capillaries will refuse their entry. And so it impairs blood flow through the capillaries. And we need that to make sure that all of our cells are getting bathed in oxygen and have nutrients to absorb, and also that their waste products are carried away effectively, and that we have proper blood flow in all areas of our body. And red root can really help that. It creates a lot of movement in the blood, in the cardiovascular system, and also in the lymphatic system, as I mentioned. And so this unstacking of the blood cells can really create an overall beneficial health cascade through the improvement of circulation of blood to all the nooks and crannies of your body. And these beneficial health cascades include things like helping to reduce swollen tonsils and chronically swollen glands in the body, helping to improve lymphatic flow and function, helping to improve blood flow and function, oxygenating the body. And also, these kinds of effects can help a person who is, say, maybe having trouble recovering from an illness. Maybe they can't quite get over that hump and really finish off their healing process or their recovery process, when someone's stagnating in their recovery, and you can't quite figure out why, this is a great thing to add that might really help push people into that next level of feeling better. And I found it to be really useful for all of those purposes that I've already mentioned. I wouldn't want to have a case of swollen tonsils or swollen glands in the body without this. And then let's see, just checking here on the chat. Red root, safe to take with NSAIDs. Well, I think it could cause a little bit of sensitivity, but I don't think it would be a problem. I'd have to double check to see. I don't really think that's a contraindication, but I wouldn't want to say for sure without just checking a little bit more on that. And then yes, Sue asks about using the root. We're just using the root. And then Native Seed Search in Tucson is a good place to purchase, Nancy mentioned. So native foods, flowers, and beans. And then Megan asks, does it help with blood clots? It can. I probably would think of some other herbs that I might choose as preferred treatments for that, but it might be, I think red root could be a useful part of a formula for that, a useful component for that. That's a kind of a complicated question, a little bit beyond what we have time to talk about here tonight, but be a useful component for that. Let's move right along here to sage, or the Artemisia species. We have quite a few sage species, Artemisia species here in the Southwest. This is another plant where there are species that range around the world. So people and cultures around the world have integrated sage into their stories, into their lives, into their magic, into their healing processes. You know, I'm a person who is grounded in science, but I really do like botanical lore, because at first you might think, oh, well, you know, those are stories from a bygone era. Those are old wives' tales. What do they mean to us now? But really, they do help us to understand the reality of our ancestors and what our ancestors' lives were like. And herbs that were used for magical purposes or ritual purposes still have uses today. You know, we like to think of ourselves perhaps as more rational people than our ancestors were, but in reality, we're still afraid of things we don't understand. We still live with a lot of unknowns and things that we worry about. And having an aromatic plant like sage, which has an amazing aroma, really aromatic plants that engage us on a sensory level have the ability to help transform our perspectives and transform our emotional states. And I think these can also be really helpful remedies for people, even without having this really grounded, factual kind of application. So I don't discount those stories. They do have value, and they do help us also. Plants are more than these practical things that we talk about in terms of sustaining wildlife and giving us food and medicine. But plants, you know, many people study with me because they want to reconnect with their cultural heritage. They want to reconnect with their ancestors. They want to reestablish lost lines of traditions through botanicals. Plants used to play a much more major role in everyone's lives than they do today. You know, we have really moved away from nature as a species. Humans have really moved away from nature, and plants can help us, you know, reconnect with nature and with our own lineages, no matter where in the world those lineages are. So sage is one of those. Sage has a long, long history of relationship with humans. This goes back to many stories of the old world, mythological heroes. Look at the genus name. This is named after Artemis. And so many plants really do have this incredible, potent botanical lore behind them, which are revealing about their medicinal attributes. So let's just talk about that a little bit. Sage isn't commonly eaten as a food, but it is a very important herbal medicine. And most of these species are used pretty interchangeably. I've just included a few of the more common ones of our region because, of course, as I mentioned, I really want to encourage people to work with the most common plants around us and steer clear of species which might be struggling with over-harvesting or environmental changes that they're experiencing. And so, we have a comment about this being a favorite plant of someone in the audience, and it's one of mine too. I find it to be so characteristic of Western landscapes. It really makes me feel at home. But as someone whose ancestors are from Northern Europe, it also really makes me feel connected to my past. So it's a cool way to remember where I'm from, but also remember where I am. And so sage as a medicine, we gather these leafy parts, also the flowering stalks if they happen to be present. This is really strong as the tea. So it can be used in that way in small amounts, but it's good to remember that small amounts of tea and internal applications of this are better because this is a very strong medicine internally. It's a really great antimicrobial, so it's excellent for an array of infectious conditions, also topical for wound care. It's a great purifying herb. When I think about the traditions of herbs, many herbal practices, especially indigenous herbal practices, have a lot of purification practices involved in it. And so Artemisia or sage is really one of the top purifying herbs we have. It helps to clean out the body in so many ways. It opens the pores and creates diaphoretic action, which means opening the pores to release heat and sweat as a cleansing process. This also really moves the urinary system as a diuretic and can help clean the body through diuresis. It also is stimulating to the digestive system. It's bitter. And so bitter tasting herbs stimulate the digestive process, increases salivation, increases most of the species increase stomach acid and increase that smooth muscle peristaltic action in the intestines to help you more effectively digest your food, more effectively extract and use the nutrients in your food. So, and more effectively to eliminate wastes from the body through the digestive system as well. And so when we are able to really gently and effectively clean out the body through all these mechanisms, we are reducing toxins, whether they're things produced by our own body, waste products, or whether they're environmental contaminants or any kind of toxins in the body. Sage is going to help you get rid of them. And when we get rid of toxins, we reduce the likelihood of exciting that inflammatory cascade, which causes inflammation and whatever symptoms you may be experiencing of that. So sage is commonly used for things like arthritis and all kinds of chronic inflammatory conditions. It can be used as a topical medicine as well. I like to make infused oils and liniments. You can soak in this if you're a person who likes to take baths. And so you can absorb the medicine of sage topically through your body, through massage, through soaking. And so there's many ways to really bring sage into your life. And then there's a question about using it as a diuretic and can it help with fevers? Yes, diaphoretic action, opening the pores to release heat, can help with fevers, absolutely. And a question about UTIs. This could be a component in a UTI formula. Again, I would think of other herbs first, but if sage is a plant that you really like working with, it could help to fill that antimicrobial component and the diuretic component of a UTI formula. But again, you would want to think about other complementary herbs with that as well. And for Sue asks, what form for a bath? So basically for a bath, what I like to do is to make like a super concentrated tea in a stock pot on my stove using the aerial parts of the plant. And then I strain that tea out so that I don't have to clean it all out of my bathtub later. After you've had this nice relaxing bath, who wants to go scrub their tub, right? So I make the tea in a stock pot on my stove and I make it super strong so that I can just pour it into my bath water and soak in that tea. And then, you know, since you're diluting it in other water, you want to make it really strong on your stovetop. So let's move along here so we have time to talk about these other plants. Juniper is a plant I could talk to you about all night. Juniper is one of my personal favorites. I wrote very lovingly and extensively about this plant in my book. If you're a juniper lover, I think you're really going to like reading the various parts of the book where this plant appears. My book begins with a lot of ecological botanical storytelling, stories about landscapes and how plants do their work every day in landscapes and in ecosystems. And then the second part of the book is a materia medica, where I go into detail about 39 plant species, and one of them is juniper. I also talk a lot about my personal relationship with this plant in the book. So it serves as an example for people who are seeking to explore relationships with plants in the natural world. So juniper, we have these leafy greens, which we could be using. We also have the berries, which we could be using. And I really use these in different ways. So the berries specifically are really good. Somebody asked about UTIs a minute ago. They are a really good urinary antiseptic. So they would be something I would definitely like to include in a protocol for urinary tract infections. I really just like the taste of juniper berry tea. You know, if you like gin, you'll probably like juniper berries because they're used in making gin. And so, you know, some people might love it, some people might hate it, you know, depending on your preferences. But I think juniper berry tea tastes pretty good. It's also a nice carminative, which means it helps with gas and bloating in the digestive system. If you get that from eating, then juniper berry tea can be really relieving of that symptom. Also, as I mentioned, the greenery is really useful. That's my favorite part, really. I mean, I like the whole thing, but one of my favorite herbal remedies is to make juniper infused oil. I like to make it out of these green branches, and it's one of the most aromatic body oils you can make. I would just use it as a botanical perfume. You can use it as a relaxant massage oil. Juniper is very relaxant to the physical body, to the musculature. So it helps people to relax when they're in pain or physical discomfort, or when they just have a lot of anxiety and emotional distress that they're tensing up their bodies. I think after having gone through this whole last year, there's a lot of trauma that is resurfacing for people, a lot of emotional difficulties that have emerged newly during the trials and tribulations of the pandemic. I think juniper has a big role to play right now in helping people to deal with difficult emotions and difficult changes in people's lives. And so juniper is both protective and dispersive at the same time. So you can use it for all of these kinds of emotional issues that are coming up, to help move through them while also feeling safe in this vulnerable process of dealing with emotions and trauma. Also, on a more practical level, this dispersive quality, this aromatic quality that moves and breaks things up is great for things like congestion in the respiratory system. If you have a really gnarly cold with a lot of constriction in the respiratory system, juniper really helps to open that up and move that. And so juniper has many things we could say about it. If you look it up in ethnobotanical books and in scientific literature, it just has so much information. We just don't really have time to go through all that juniper has to offer tonight, but I hope you can just tell by the love in my voice and what little bit I have shared about it tonight, what a big role this plant has to play. It's so important ecologically, providing habitat for so many animals across so many landscapes, and is so useful to humans, having so many healing attributes. And then Bruce asked what type of oil. So you can infuse it into any kind of oil you like. I'm a fan of, I like to do it in a combination of olive oil and maybe avocado oil or grapeseed oil. I like all of those. Olive oil on its own can be a little bit greasy, so a lot of times I'll use part olive oil and part something else like grapeseed oil or avocado oil are my preferences. You could use coconut oil too, though that has kind of its own fragrance, and so I tend to not use that with aromatic herbs. But if you have other cosmetic oils or body oils that you like, you could use those also. And then the question about juniper allergies, can you take it as a tea, etc.? I don't think that being allergic to juniper is a problem. I would just say do not collect juniper for medicinal use during the pollen time. You know, wait until summertime after the pollen is done to collect it so that you're not putting all of that pollen into the preparation. So don't collect it in the spring when everyone's suffering from their allergies. Wait until later. It's really aromatic all summer long, so you have plenty of time to harvest it after that. And then the best way to harvest juniper, I just take pruners, hand pruners, and I clip off a few little branches. A little of this goes a long way. It's a really strong internal remedy. So I use very small amounts internally, and I really use it a lot more topically. It's kind of like sage in that regard, really strong internally, and you can use it a lot more topically. And it's just a little bit more gentler that way. And then culinary sage is a different genus. Yes, Donna, thank you for clarifying that. The culinary kitchen sage is a salvia. We're talking about artemisias here tonight. So thanks for bringing that up so no one is confused. I'm going to move on from juniper because I could seriously get stuck on this forever. But if you take more classes with me, you'll hear me talk about all of these plants a lot more, especially juniper. So here's wolfberry. This one's not in my book, so take good notes right now. But I couldn't talk about plants for wildlife and birds without including wolfberry, which I really like, and I'll definitely be making a space for this in my next book. We have a number of lyceum species that we could be talking about again. You're looking here at Lycium torii, but there are others. Lycium pallidum is also area. And so this is just a really cool, wild looking kind of dry soil, very drought tolerant shrub. I love to eat these berries. They are so good. I like to collect them and I put them in baking, you know, like anywhere where you might use dried fruits or raisins or anything like that. You can substitute out these and put them in your recipes for cookies and muffins and energy bars or whatever it is you like to make. They're also just delicious right off the bush. So you want to gather them. I gather these in the summertime. You want them to kind of look a little bit overripe. That's when they're actually their best tasting and they have their most sugars, they have their sweetest flavor. When they look actually a little bit maybe past their prime is when they're just perfect. Now, I will say to be careful about eating too many of these. If you think they're delicious like I do, you could just gobble down more than you should. Eating too many could bring up a little bit of heat and dryness, but if you eat them in moderation, no problem. It's always about just being, you know, don't go too crazy with things and know what you're doing. This is why I teach on a regular basis, is to help people to know how to use herbs safely and not hurt themselves. And it is possible to do harm with botanical medicines for sure. So we just have to always say that. But these are delicious just to eat as a wild food. Wolfberry leaves and berries are also a medicine. It's a pretty strong medicine. This is a nightshade family member, which if you know anything about plants, you may know that this family of plants does have some toxicity to it. So you don't want to overdo it. A little bit is great, but too much can pull you out of balance and make you not feel well. And these are related to the famous superfood relative, the goji berries. And so I like to remind people about just taking it easy and remembering always that wildlife depends on these. So we don't want to take too much. We always want to be respectful and remember that we're part of this ecological community where everyone needs access to wild food, not just us. I especially just want to mention that because this is a time of year where I always see on social media a lot of posts of people gathering buckets and buckets of wild foods. And I just feel, that we really want to take a step back and think about whether, we're being gracious and respectful in our way of interacting in the world. So just keep that in mind, because that's what makes good medicine, is our relationship with the natural world. That's where all of our health and wellness originates. And we don't want to jeopardize that by taking too much. And so wolfberry is also a medicine that is decongesting for the respiratory system. I always combine it with other herbs so that I'm keeping the amount low that a person is consuming. So I don't ever use it by itself, but there's a lot of great companion plants like Mormon tea, which we're not going to talk about, but it does have herbal medicine applications as well. But it's primarily just a really delicious wild berry to eat. So, let's see, can you, let's see. Lorraine asked, can you buy wolfberry at nurseries? I think so. I'd have to, check and see what nurseries are selling. They're still getting stocked up, but this is a native plant. I mean, I would look at plants of the Southwest, but wherever you are, just call and ask. And there are many species of wolfberries that nurseries might have. And then, let's see, we have some input on bird knowledgeable people about bird relationships with plants. So I always appreciate that. I get a chance to learn a little bit too. And so last plant that I wanted to talk with you guys about tonight is sumac. This is also not in my book, but I really wanted to include it in this discussion because it's so important for wildlife. And it's delicious. So we have several species of sumac in New Mexico. What we're looking at here is the species that you would see down in the desert parts of our state. In the southern half of New Mexico is this plant is more common. In other regions, you might see the three-leaf sumac, the Rus trilobata, which I see in the Bosque here, our Riverside Forest in New Mexico. I see it like in the mountain foothills and so on. And then you have a staghorn sumac that you can find in cooler environments, higher elevations. So there are different species. I'm just showing you my favorite one. And actually, this one is known to host a large number of bird species. It provides really good cover for birds in desert environments where there aren't that many big trees or shrubs. And so it's really important habitat for birds and other animals. And I just think this is one of the coolest plants. I was just down in the Chihuahua Desert last week and it was flowering and really pretty. So I know there's going to be lots of berries down there this summer. I do like to go and collect some, and this makes one of the best tasting wild drinks that you're ever going to make. If you want to make delicious cooling beverages this summer, I highly recommend collecting some sumac berries. And then just they're covered in these tiny hairs, and that's where all the flavor is. So you don't ever want to collect them after a rainstorm. You want to get them when they're hairy and dry. And I just will put a handful of them in a pitcher of cold water and let that soak in my refrigerator for a couple of hours. And then you have like a very tart, unsweetened lemonade. Most lemonades have some kind of sweetener added to them. I make a lot of herbal syrups. So those would be syrups which are made out of various kinds of good tasting herbs, but I make them with honey, so they're sweet. And I will take some kind of herbal syrup that I've made. A rose herbal syrup would be amazing. Juniper berries also make a delicious herbal syrup. So that's two plants we've talked about here tonight that you could combine into this culinary extravaganza that we're discussing. And so make some kind of herbal syrup or any kind of sweetener. You could just stir in some honey or some sugar or agave syrup, whatever it is you like. And then you're going to have one of the best tasting lemonades, wild beverages that you've ever had. And a little goes a long way. You don't even need that many to make a great pitcher of lemonade. So think about that. You know, I like to talk about desert plants because I feel like a lot of times people think the desert is just empty, and it's so rich and so beautiful and so full of life. And this is just one example of that. And Megan adds that these were used for making Navajo baskets as well. So that's a really cool extra tidbit of knowledge. That's what's so great about coming together, people sharing what they know, so we can all learn a little bit more and feel a little bit more connected with the land and a little bit more connected with each other. So I love that. And then let's see, I missed a few things here in the chat. And then Virginia says that wolfberry can spread a lot, but birds love the berries. I'm kind of like, yeah, like let's spread that wolfberry all around, because then the more for all of us. Yeah, the Trilobata sumac trees do make really good juice as well. And then Karen says, most of these shrubs I recognize from growing wild on my property in Roswell, but are any not suitable? Also are all okay for free range chickens. I can't think of any problems with chickens. I've never raised chickens, so there could be a lot I don't know about that, but I don't know of any issues with that. And then Karen, I'm not sure if what you mean by your question, or any not suitable. These are all native plants. And so I think most of these would do great in the desert area around Roswell. Roses might be needing a little bit more water than the others that we've talked about. And then Ariel adds that sumac can be used as a dry spice as well to add tartness, like is commonly used in the Middle East. That's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that. So that's sounds fun. I'm going to think about that. Oh, and then Karen clarifies the wrong elevation. No, I think most of these plants really would be pretty good for your elevation. Like I said, the roses would be the one that might just need more water, maybe a little bit of shade or something like that, because Roswell is a lot hotter. But all of these others are very drought tolerant, and roses spread rhizomatically, so rhizomatously. So they, once they get established, they do a pretty good job, but you might need a little extra water establishing them. So if you have more questions, we still have a few more minutes, but here's my book. Once again, if you want to read more about this, check out my book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine. If you'd like to take classes with me, I teach on a regular basis throughout the year. You can find me at albuquerqueherbalism.com. We have a new herbal semester starting at the end of August that you could join. And work organizing the community to do that. If you live in central New Mexico and can get to Albuquerque, please feel free to join us at the Yerba Mansa Project, or if you would just like to support our work through donations and partnership, check us out at yerbamansapproject.org. We do a lot of good work organizing the community, providing free programming, and doing that caretaking and restoration work on our public lands. And so thanks once again to the Audubon Society and to Sally for hosting us here tonight. And thanks also to the University of New Mexico Press for helping to set this up. And if you want to see me again, you know where to find me. And I'm going to keep my eye on the chat just in case any extra questions came in there. But thank you, everyone, for a lovely evening together.
Thank you so much, Dara. That was really wonderful. If you don't mind, I might share my screen now just to kind of promote the upcoming webinars that we have with Audubon.
Absolutely, go for it.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending. And I just wanted to really quickly pitch our upcoming webinars. So in a couple of weeks, as a part of our spring series, we have a webinar called El Rito Grande. Our hydrologist here at Audubon Southwest is going to be talking all about the Rio and sort of how it has changed through history. And then later on in May, we're going to have a advocacy training from our policy director. And then into the summer, we have a beer and birds webinar, and there will be more to come later this summer. So find us on Facebook or on Instagram or Twitter. And yeah, you can look for all that information on our other webinars there. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. And thank you so much, Dara. That was really, really wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone sharing their time. I know how precious it is.